We all know the stories: the Titanic split by an iceberg, the Great Fire of London consuming a city, the San Francisco earthquake shaking a nation. These are the tragedies etched into our collective memory. But what if history's most horrific catastrophes are the ones you've never heard of? What if the most bizarre, terrifying, and world-changing events were quietly forgotten, hidden in the shadows of time? This isn't a list of the famous. It's a journey into the unseen annals of annihilation, where we uncover 10 disasters so strange and immense, they will change the way you see history forever. At number 10, we have one of the most bizarre and almost unbelievable disasters in history, the London beer flood of 1814, also known as the Tsunami of Stout. On an ordinary day in the bustling St. Giles neighborhood, tragedy struck when a colossal 22-foot-tall wooden vat at the Horseshoe Brewery suddenly ruptured. The vat, holding a massive quantity of dark porter, gave way with such violent force that it triggered a chain reaction, bursting open additional barrels and unleashing a monstrous torrent of beer. Contemporary reports describe the flood as a 15-foot-high wall of liquid, with between 128,000 and 323,000 imperial gallons of porter crashing through the streets like a tidal wave. The deluge surged directly into the overcrowded and impoverished St. Giles Rookery, demolishing homes, businesses, and even sweeping people off their feet. In one particularly heartbreaking incident, a wake for a 2-year-old child turned into an unimaginable horror when mourners drowned in the flood. In total, 8 lives were lost immediately, with one additional victim later succumbing to alcohol poisoning. The stench of spilled beer lingered for months, turning the neighborhood into a grim reminder of the tragedy. Shockingly, when the case went to court, the inquest ruled the event an act of God, absolving the brewery of any blame and even granting them a rebate for their losses. Far from being just a quirky footnote, this ruling highlighted how 19th-century legal systems protected powerful corporations, leaving victims without justice. The Great Beer Flood remains one of the most extraordinary industrial accidents ever recorded, a chilling reminder of how even something as celebratory as beer could turn into a force of death and devastation. At number 9, we move to Boston in 1919, where one of the strangest and deadliest floods in history swept through the city, not of water, but of molasses. On January 15th, a giant storage tank in the North End, containing more than 2 million gallons of fermented molasses, suddenly ruptured. With a thunderous explosion, the tank gave way, sending forth a 160-foot-wide, 40-foot-high wall of sticky liquid surging at an astonishing 35 miles per hour. The sheer power of the wave was catastrophic, smashing buildings off their foundations, overturning vehicles, and trapping everything in its path. Horses and people alike were engulfed in the thick, syrupy tide, which made escape nearly impossible. The cold winter air caused the molasses to rapidly harden, turning streets into deadly traps and suffocating anyone unlucky enough to be caught. Rescue efforts were agonizingly slow as the gooey substance clung to debris, bodies, and machinery, making movement almost impossible. By the time the disaster ended, 21 people were dead and over 150 were injured, with survivors describing the streets as resembling a scene from a nightmare. The molasses tank, it was later revealed, had been poorly constructed, rushed to meet wartime demand for industrial alcohol used in munitions. This negligence turned what seemed like an ordinary day into a sticky apocalypse. For years, the neighborhood bore the smell of molasses, and cleanup crews struggled to remove the hardened syrup that had seeped into cracks, buildings, and waterways. Today, the Great Molasses Flood serves as a haunting reminder that even a sweet, harmless kitchen ingredient can, under the wrong circumstances, become a weapon of mass destruction. At number 8, we uncover a catastrophe often overshadowed by the more famous Great Chicago Fire, yet it remains the deadliest wildfire in American history, the Peshtigo Fire of 1871. On the night of October 8th, as Chicago burned, a far more destructive inferno raged just 250 miles north in Wisconsin. Fueled by an unusually dry summer and reckless logging practices, the Peshtigo Fire exploded into what survivors described as a tornado of flames. A firestorm so violent it created its own weather system. The blaze consumed oxygen from the air, hurling houses and rail cars into the sky, while entire communities were incinerated within minutes. In just 1 hour, the prosperous logging town of Peshtigo was reduced to ash, along with 16 nearby settlements. Survivors recalled scenes of sheer horror as families dove into the Peshtigo River, only to freeze, drown, or suffocate as the flames consumed everything around them. The estimated death toll ranges from 1,500 to 2,500 lives lost, dwarfing the number killed in Chicago's fire. Yet the tragedy was largely forgotten because the urban disaster in Chicago captured the headlines. The intensity of the Peshtigo fire was so extreme that it was later called a blow-up, nature's nuclear explosion, a chilling description of its unparalleled fury. Entire forests were annihilated, leaving behind a wasteland of ash and silence where vibrant communities once stood. Unlike Chicago, there were no grand rebuilding efforts or immortalized myths like Mrs. O'Leary's cow, only devastation and forgotten graves. The Peshtigo fire reminds us that history often remembers the popular narrative while overlooking tragedies that claimed far more lives. It stands as a stark warning of how human negligence, environmental conditions, and chance can converge to unleash destruction on a scale nearly impossible to comprehend. At number 7, we encounter one of the most mysterious and terrifying natural explosions in recorded history, the Tunguska event of 1908. On the morning of June 30th, deep in the remote taiga forest of Siberia, the sky lit up with a searing flash of light, followed by an explosion so immense it flattened nearly 2,000 square miles of forest. Though no city stood in its path, the blast's magnitude was almost beyond comprehension. Scientists estimate its force at 1,000 times greater than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The trees at ground zero were scorched and hurled outward in perfect radial symmetry, creating a barren epicenter that looked as though a giant hand had pressed down from the heavens. Strangely, no traditional impact crater was ever found, leading to endless debate over the true cause. Most believe it was a comet or asteroid exploding in the atmosphere, vaporizing before striking Earth. But alternative theories range from volcanic gases to alien spacecraft. Witnesses living miles away reported being thrown from chairs, windows shattering, and a deafening shockwave rolling across the tundra. For days afterward, night skies across Europe glowed eerily bright, likely from ice particles or cosmic dust high in the atmosphere. If the detonation had occurred over a major city, millions would have perished in an instant, altering the course of history. Instead, it stands as a chilling cosmic warning, a reminder that Earth is a vulnerable target in a chaotic universe, and that humanity's survival may depend as much on luck as on preparation. The Tunguska event remains one of the greatest unsolved natural mysteries, straddling the line between science and legend. At number 6, we turn to an invisible assassin that crept silently into one of the world's largest cities, the Great Smog of London, in December 1952. It began innocuously as a dense fog, something Londoners were long accustomed to. But this was no ordinary mist. A stalled weather system trapped a lethal cocktail of coal smoke, vehicle exhaust, and factory pollution, blanketing the city in a yellowish-black haze so thick that people could not see their own feet. Visibility fell to mere inches in places, bringing cars, buses, trains, and even boats on the River Thames to a standstill. Life ground to a halt. Ambulances could not reach hospitals, sporting events were cancelled, and even the Opera House was forced to abandon performances as the smog seeped into theaters. Yet the real horror lay in the air people were breathing. The toxic fog contained sulfur dioxide at levels over 100 times the World Health Organization's modern safety standards, mixed with deadly particulates that clawed at lungs and throats. Over the course of 5 suffocating days, an estimated 12,000 people died from respiratory failure, heart attacks, and infections triggered by the poison in the air. Another 100,000 were left ill or permanently weakened. This disaster, though silent and slow, was one of the most devastating environmental catastrophes of the modern era. Its aftermath shocked the British government into action, leading to the Clean Air Act of 1956, which banned coal burning in cities and laid the foundation for environmental protection worldwide. The Great Smog of London serves as a sobering lesson. Sometimes the deadliest killers are not explosions or floods, but the invisible poisons we allow ourselves to breathe. At number 5, we arrive at a man-made catastrophe so violent it was, for decades, the largest explosion ever created by humans, the Halifax explosion of 1917. During the First World War, the Canadian port city of Halifax, Nova Scotia, was a critical lifeline, sending convoys of supplies and soldiers across the Atlantic. On the morning of December 6th, tragedy unfolded when the Norwegian vessel SS Imo collided with the French freighter SS Mont Blanc in the narrow harbor passage. What seemed at first like an accident at sea quickly escalated into disaster. The Mont Blanc's cargo was a floating arsenal of TNT, picric acid, benzol, and high-octane fuel, enough to level an entire city. As fire engulfed the ship, its crew abandoned it, desperately shouting warnings that few understood. Curious residents gathered at windows and along the shorelines, unaware they were seconds from annihilation. At 9:05 a.m., the Mont Blanc erupted in a blinding flash. The detonation tore through the city, obliterating entire neighborhoods, sending a tidal wave crashing into the waterfront and producing a shockwave so powerful it was heard hundreds of miles away. Nearly 2,000 people were killed instantly, with another 9,000 maimed or injured, many blinded by shards of glass as windows shattered in an instant. Fires raged through the ruins, trapping survivors, while snow began to fall that night, blanketing the wreckage in silence. International aid poured in, particularly from Massachusetts, whose rapid response forged a lasting bond between the two regions. Medical teams innovated new surgical techniques, particularly in eye care, in response to the sheer scale of injuries. The Halifax explosion was a chilling demonstration of how industrial warfare's reach could devastate even civilian cities far from the front lines. And it remains one of the most shocking maritime disasters in history. At number 4, we face one of the strangest and most haunting natural disasters of the modern age. The Lake Nyos disaster of 1986, a catastrophe so unusual that many people still don't know what happened. Nestled high in the volcanic mountains of Cameroon, Lake Nyos looked tranquil and harmless, but beneath its calm surface lay a lethal secret. For decades, volcanic activity deep under the lake had been leaking massive amounts of carbon dioxide gas, which gradually dissolved and built up at the lakebed. Normally, water circulation would release such gases slowly, but the tropical climate kept the upper waters warm and stable, locking the deadly gas in place like a ticking time bomb. On the night of August 21, 1986, the pressure finally broke. Without warning, the lake erupted in a limnic explosion, sending a suffocating cloud of CO2 rolling silently down the surrounding valleys. This invisible wave of gas displaced the oxygen in the air, causing thousands of people and animals to collapse where they stood. Entire villages were wiped out in minutes. Survivors described waking to find loved ones, neighbors, and livestock lying dead without a single wound on their bodies. In total, more than 1,700 people and countless animals perished in one of the most chillingly quiet disasters in history. Unlike a fire or flood, there was no sound, no visible warning, only breath stolen in an instant. Scientists rushed to study this rare event, eventually classifying it as a limnic eruption, an almost unheard-of natural phenomenon. In the years since, engineers have installed special venting pipes to prevent another buildup of gas. But Lake Nyos remains a stark reminder that even the most peaceful landscapes can conceal lethal forces waiting to strike. At number 3, we return to the Caribbean of 1780, where a storm of biblical proportions changed not only the lives of tens of thousands, but also the course of world history. Known as the Great Hurricane of 1780, it is the deadliest Atlantic hurricane ever recorded, with an estimated 22,000 deaths. Striking during the height of the American Revolutionary War, this monstrous cyclone tore through the Caribbean with winds believed to have exceeded 200 miles per hour, a force so terrifying that even stone fortresses crumbled like sandcastles. Survivors described entire islands stripped bare, trees torn of bark, cannons hurled across fortifications, and ships flung onto land as though they were toys. Barbados, Martinique, St. Lucia, and St. Eustatius were devastated, leaving little more than wreckage and mass graves. Yet the true impact extended far beyond the Caribbean. The hurricane annihilated fleets from both the French and British navies, but the French suffered disproportionately, losing over 40 warships and 4,000 soldiers. As France was America's most vital ally in the Revolutionary War, the disaster severely weakened French military support and shifted the balance of naval power in Britain's favor. Historians often overlook this storm, focusing instead on battles, treaties, and politics. But the truth is that this ghostly hurricane altered the trajectory of the war. Nature itself became an unpredictable combatant, reshaping history with winds more powerful than any weapon of the age. The Great Hurricane of 1780 stands as a grim testament to how natural disasters can ripple through geopolitics, influencing the fate of nations as much as armies and generals. At number 2, we confront the deadliest tropical cyclone in human history, the Bola cyclone of 1970, a storm so catastrophic it not only killed hundreds of thousands, but also sparked the birth of a nation. On November 12, 1970, a massive cyclone formed in the Bay of Bengal and slammed into East Pakistan, modern-day Bangladesh, with unimaginable fury. What made the storm truly apocalyptic was not just the high winds, but the towering storm surge that swallowed the low-lying islands of the Ganges Delta. Entire villages were washed away. Corpses of humans and livestock lay tangled in the wreckage, and the fertile land turned into a salty wasteland. Estimates suggest between 300,000 and 500,000 people died in a single night, making it the most lethal cyclone on record. Yet the physical destruction was only part of the tragedy. The government of West Pakistan was slow, negligent, and indifferent in its response, leaving millions stranded without food, water, or medical aid. This failure sparked a wave of anger and political unrest, fueling the independence movement in East Pakistan. Within a year, the region erupted into the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971, a conflict that birthed the nation of Bangladesh. In this sense, the Bola cyclone was more than a natural disaster. It was a catalyst for revolution and statehood. Decades later, improvements in disaster planning meant that similarly powerful storms, like Cyclone Cider in 2007, claimed far fewer lives, highlighting how much of the 1970 tragedy was the result of human inaction. The Bola cyclone remains a sobering reminder that nature's fury combined with political negligence can create disasters that reshape entire nations. Finally, at number 1, we uncover a disaster so immense and politically concealed that many only learned of it decades later. The Banqiao Dam failure of 1975, the deadliest man-made disaster in recorded history. Built in Henan Province, China, the Banqiao Dam was hailed as a triumph of engineering, designed to provide water storage and flood control. But hidden flaws and ignored warnings made it a ticking bomb. When Super Typhoon Nina stalled over the region in August 1975, more than 1,000 millimeters of rain, a year's worth, fell in just 24 hours. The dam could not withstand the pressure. At 1 a.m. on August 8th, Banqiao collapsed, unleashing a wall of water 10 kilometers wide and 33 feet high, racing across the plains at nearly 50 kilometers per hour. The deluge obliterated towns in its path, instantly killing tens of thousands. Worse still, the collapse triggered the failure of 61 other dams, compounding the destruction. The official immediate death toll was around 26,000, but in the weeks that followed, famine, disease, and isolation claimed an additional 145,000 lives, with unofficial estimates placing the total as high as 240,000. Over 10 million people were left homeless, trapped, or starving. Yet for decades, the scale of the disaster was censored and hidden by the Chinese government, preventing global awareness of the tragedy. The Banqiao catastrophe was not simply a natural disaster. It was the direct result of poor planning, political hubris, and the refusal to heed expert warnings. It remains a chilling lesson that the deadliest disasters are not always born of nature, but of human arrogance and secrecy. From a wave of molasses to a lake that breathed death, these disasters prove that tragedy wears many faces. They are not just stories of destruction, but lessons in human error, political silence, and the unpredictability of our world. The fact that so many were forgotten is almost as shocking as the events themselves. So next time you hear of a famous catastrophe, remember, the most world-shaking disasters might be the ones history tried to bury. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more untold stories of the past. Thanks for watching.